Okay, welcome back to our readings of Plato. We still try to understand how to get out of the cave, and here's a good allegory. Guys literally live in apartments like this and don't see the problem, right? So are we living like that? What happens a lot is that people criticize the media nowadays. Now, they use a certain technique, which is certainly dialectics, but Plato actually warns us of learning dialectics because then we would just criticize anything. And if so, we should use dialectics in order to find the truth. So let's jump into the text, the more abstract numbers, letters that actually require our intellect. So last time I had some problems to interpret the finger metaphor. Maybe I have to read a little bit slower. Let's go on, however. So yeah, he says basically that we have to learn math in order to seek out for the truth because that's closer to the intellect. That's so, he said. And our guardian is both a warrior and philosopher, certainly. Then it would be fitting, Glaucon, to set this study down in law and to persuade those who are going to participate in the greatest things in the city to go to calculation and to take it up, not after the fashion of private men, but to stay with it until they come to the contemplation of nature of numbers, with intellection itself, not practicing it for the sake of bullying and selling like merchants and tradesmen, but for war and for ease of turning the soul itself around becoming to truth and being. And I have some problems here. My dog is actually trying to eat the cable. Hegel, no. Her name is Hegel. Okay. Anyway. Yeah, so what for do we need mathematics to learn? It's all for the sake of turning the soul towards the truth. Then it would be fitting. Okay, we had that. What you say is very fine, he said. And further, I said, now that the study of calculation has been mentioned, I recognize how subtle it is and how in many ways it is useful to us for what we want. If a man practices it for the sake of coming to know and not for trade. In what way? He said. Okay, so why is it useful and in what way, right? In the very way we were just now saying, it leads the soul powerfully upward and compels it to discuss numbers themselves. It won't at all permit anyone to propose for discussion numbers that are attached to visible and tangible bodies. For surely you know the way of men who are clever in these things. If in the argument someone attempts to cut the one itself, they laugh and won't permit it. If you try to break it up into a small coin, they multiply, taking good care against the ones ever looking like it were not one but many pieces. Okay, I don't really understand that. Need a second to meditate what he's saying here. Okay, admittedly, I'm a bit lost here. What kind of number he means? It seems there are people who break the one apart, but it's important to understand numbers as oneness because it goes on. What, Glaucon, do you suppose would happen if someone were to ask them, you surprising man, what sort of numbers are you discussing, in which the one is your axiom claims it to be, each one equal to every other one, without the slightest difference between them, and containing no parts within itself? What do you suppose they would answer? So what I think he's talking here about are something like forms that are not infected by material, because material in its concrete shape is diverse, right? And can be broken up, but numbers are one and cannot be broken up. And that's maybe something that is part of maths. What, Glaucon, do you suppose would happen if someone were to ask them, you surprising man, what sort of numbers are you discussing, in which the one is your axiom claims it to be? I read that, right? I suppose they would answer that they are talking about those numbers that admit only of being thought and can be grasped in no other way. Yeah, because objects can be taken apart, right? Do you see then, my friend, I said that it's likely that this study is really compulsory for us, since it evidently compels the soul to use the intellect itself on the truth itself. So I think this is an argument for how the study of math drives us away from the sensible realm and drives us more to the realm of forms. I think that's what he wants to do here. What about this? Have you already observed that men who are by nature apt at calculation are naturally quick in virtually all studies, while those who are slow, if they are educated and given gymnastics in it, all make progress by becoming quicker than they were, even if they are benefited in no other way? So I think this is an argument for the education through math, that we become quicker by doing so. That's so, he said. And further, I don't suppose you would easily find many studies that take greater effort in the learning and in the practice than this. Certainly not. Then for all these reasons, this study shouldn't be neglected, and the best natures must be educated in it. Okay, it's just an argument for maths, right? I join my voice to yours, he said. Therefore, we have settled on this one. I said, and let's consider whether the study adjoining this one is in any way suitable. What is it, he said. Or do you mean geometry? That's exactly it, I said. As much of it as applies to the business of war is plainly suitable, he said. In pitching camp, assaulting places, gathering the army together and drawing it up in line, and in all other maneuvers armies make in the battle itself and on marches, it would make quite a difference to a man whether he were skilled in geometry or not. However, I said, for such things only a small portion of geometry as of calculation would suffice. It must be considered whether its greater and more advanced part tends to make it easier to make out the idea of the good. And we say that this tendency is possessed by everything that compels the soul to turn around to the region inhabited by the happiest part of what it is, which is what the soul must by all means see. So, okay, we want to turn the soul to the happiest part of it, which is not something that Plato calls the multi-headed beast, I guess. And now what we do here is we make another argument for how geometry as a branch of math, I guess, leads us to the idea of the good. What you say is right, he said. Then if geometry compels one to looking at being, it is suitable. If at becoming it is not suitable. That's what we affirm. Well then, I said, none of those who have even a little experience with geometry will dispute it with us. This kind of knowledge is exactly the opposite of what is said about it in the arguments of those who take it up. How, he said, in that they surely speak in a way that is as ridiculous as it is necessary. They speak as though they were men of action and were making all the arguments for the sake of action, uttering sounds like squaring, applying, adding, and everything of the sort, whereas the whole study is surely pursued for the sake of knowledge. So, okay, so many people seem to make an argument that maths and geometry is for the sake of action, while actually it pertains to the idea of the good and is therefore part of theory. That's entirely certain, he said. Mustn't we also come to an agreement about the following point? What? That it is for the sake of knowing what is always and not at all for what is at any time coming into being and passing away. Okay, this is an argument that we want to be informed about something that is being, something that is eternal and not changing, instead of being informed about something like becoming. And here we can, for example, mention something like particular pop culture or something that has a truth for the moment. So I lost, where have we been? Yeah, that may well be agreed, he said, for geometrical knowing is of what is always. So this is the point, right? We want to know something forever, not just for a moment. And the idea is that there are geometrical laws. Of course, that is debatable nowadays, right? Since we have different kinds of geometry. Euclidean, non-Euclidean geometry seems to be the important word here, the important words to be distinguished. Then, you noble man, it would draw the soul toward truth and be productive of philosophic understanding and directing upward what now improperly direct downward. So we are directed downwards most of the time to becoming, but we want to be directed towards being. It does, he said, to the greatest extent possible. Then, to the greatest extent possible, I said, the man in your beautiful city must be enjoined in no way to abstain from geometry, for even its byproducts aren't slight. What are they? He said. What you said about war, of course, I said, and in addition, with respect to finer perception of all studies, we surely know there is a general and complete difference between the man who has been devoted to geometry and the one who has not. Yes, by Zeus, he said, the difference is complete. Then shall we set this down as the second study for the young? Yes, he said, we shall set it down. And what about this? Okay, now we come to astronomy. But I think we can finish here. So he reconstructs math as a science that pertains to the intellect, and geometry also something that draws us to the laws of being instead drawn us to the laws of becoming that are changeable and maybe depending on the empirical situation. Of course, this differentiation is debatable. And surely we can ask whether Plato has here the right understanding of mathematics. But I tend to read Plato in the sense of ideals. So even though we know that there are different maths, we still say something like that if we had an idea of the good, an idea of an absolute form about maths, things would be much easier. And somehow, at least, we try to find the laws also in math that are more stable for us and that guarantee for us more predictions about numbers or whatsoever. And so in that sense, we follow an ideal of being and try to let something that only becomes behind. Now, can there be also a science of becoming, which is probably practical philosophy? I wouldn't deny this, right? But it is in a dialectical relationship to whatever being is, and that is what we have to consider. Well, then, this is kind of complicated, and it includes more complicated interpretations of Plato nowadays, 3,000 or 2,500 years later. I mean, certainly, in Plato's age, these ideas, I believe, would have been more convincing. I think what he was fighting rather with is a certain kind of cynicism that might is right, and also maybe a lack of education. Or, of course, also mistrust in dialectical discussion where they say, well, you can claim everything, right? But it's not kind of the mathematics that we have developed today, where we have great struggles to find a unified source for mathematics. So I think Plato had to change his theory quite a bit. I mean, we will also read from Aristotle the principles of non-contradiction, which Aristotle is very convinced of. But of course, nowadays we have systems that set off the principle of contradiction. What is his name? Graham Priest would be just one example, constructing systems that don't need the principle of non-contradiction. But that's a topic for another time. If you want to see it, then maybe you should follow this channel. I will force you to be educated. I will make you educated. Live long, like this video, and prosper.